Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we are reviewing books of every genre, looking for the best fun escapist books that everyone should read. And today we're doing an historical fiction, a juvenile historical fiction, Little House on the Prairie. This is by Laura Ingalls Wilder. It is a dramatic but true story of Laura's childhood. This was written long enough ago that the first book in the series, this is actually the second book in case you weren't aware, but the first book in the series, Little House in the Big Woods, is going to be in public domain shortly. So I'm recording this in 2025, and Little House in the Big Woods is going to be in public domain in 2028, so only a couple more years. So these were written almost 100 years ago, and they're written to kids. But if you haven't read them, you really should. You won't regret the interesting books. There are about 9 books in the series, and I don't know that they are required reading for children in school anymore, but certainly one of them was for me, which told me about them, and then I started reading them on my own after that and read the whole series, and several of them are just excellent for anybody. If you haven't read the whole series, I would highly recommend Little House on the Prairie and The Long Winter. Those were my 2 favorites reading the whole series. I'm now reading them to my kids, which is why I'm doing this review, because I'm reading them aloud to my kids, so I might as well review them, right? And okay, so the plot. This is about Laura's life. The first one was about her life in where she was born, where she grew up in a woods in, I don't know, Wisconsin or something. I can't remember exactly where. But they went on a covered wagon trail out west in the 1800s to find a new homestead. So in this book, they have arrived at a location in the Great Plains area. I'm not sure exactly where. I kind of think Missouri. I'm pretty sure, because they kept saying that they're 40 miles from Independence, and I think it's Independence, Missouri, but I'm not 100% sure. In any case, they find just a lump of ground. They're like, this looks good, sure, let's try this. And they settle down, and just with only what they had in their covered wagon, they start to build a farm. Their livelihood is their home right there. And it is the story of that first year of doing that in the prairie. And it's mind-blowing, some of the details on this. I mean, it's so far distant past, even if it's only been 150 years or so since today, but that the things that they put up with, that they lived with, that they were proud of, that they were excited about, is just totally blows my mind. I am just way too privileged to be able to understand life with nothing like they had. They had all of 3 cups to their name, 3 little tin cups, one for Ma, one for Pa, and one shared among Laura and Mary, and then baby Carrie didn't get one. Anyway, you just look at things like that and go, wow. I mean, today in America, the poorest person could have more than 3 cups. So it's just, like I said, it's just kind of funny to me, the differences there. It's the shocking differences. And not only that, it's the historical details that really make this. Like, okay, they have arrived there in a covered wagon. How do they then go about making a home? They start out with a log cabin with a dirt floor and just holes for a door and windows. And on top, they didn't even start with chimney. They didn't have a fireplace. They didn't start with a roof. They just put the canvas cover of the wagon on top of their log cabin for a roof to start with. And then how does that grow into a house? So different chapters overcome different obstacles. Like there's one chapter devoted to putting a door on their cabin. And they have to overcome challenges to do something like this. For example, they don't have any nails. So how do they make their door? How do they make their door with a latch, with a lock? How do they make a door for the barn that the horses can't get out and nobody can get in? How do they make a fireplace? And then there are other challenges they have to overcome that are not necessarily like this. Like, for example, the Native Americans around them. They don't always speak the same language. They certainly don't have the same culture. How do they handle that? How do they interact with that? How do they approach that? What about things like a prairie fire? How do they survive a prairie fire? So the main focus of this is the historical details. All the really interesting little things. There's a whole chapter of them digging a well. And, I give a summary of that, making a door, digging a well, and it doesn't seem very exciting. But reading it is actually very engaging. You're sitting there going, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder how they did that, and how do they finish that, and how does this resolve, how does this end up? You end up really getting sucked into their lives. It's really well written. So besides liking historical details and all the challenges they overcome, I would say another thing I really like about this is the language. So the language in this was written for children, and this is probably better for children than a lot of other children's books. Like, for example, I did Wind in the Willows recently, and that was aimed at children, but the language and stuff really didn't come across as for children. This one successfully does that. Even for today's children, it feels like it was written for a young audience who doesn't always understand everything that they're talking about. So, for example, Laura's family has a frying pan that's made to go over an open fire. So it has little legs on it to sit on a fire, and they call it a spider, their spider pan. And so Laura not only mentions it, she describes it and describes how it's used. So somebody who's not used to that kind of thing, a child, can read that and picture it and understand what's going on. Or Laura says, I really want to see a papoose. And that's not a common everyday language word. Like one of my kids, when I read that, immediately piped up, what's a papoose? And then Laura, or Mary, I can't remember which child, pipes up immediately after it's brought up, what is a papoose? And then they describe that this is a baby Native American child, a baby. And they're like, oh, I want to see one. And so because that's an unusual word, the book defines it for a child. And so that it's, even though it was written 100 years ago, I think a modern child wouldn't have any trouble reading through this because of the simple language. So they did a great job with that. The character, Laura especially, they're cheerful in the face of all the difficulties. They overcome things with optimism and hard work, and it's a very morally upright family in what they're doing and how they do those things, and they're admirable role models. So I really like the characters. I like Laura a lot. I like Pa a lot. We don't see very much of Mary in this book so far, but even the little bit that you glimpse of her, it's still very interesting. Another thing that I'm not going to guarantee that every book has this, but most have illustrations, and the illustrations are at least one a chapter, I would say, and that helps a lot with the story. I think most versions have illustrations, and so I really liked that. It helped also to visualize what was going on. So when Pa is putting the canvas roof over their little cabin, there's an illustration of that, and my kids were like, oh, that's what's going on. It helped make it more real for children. So I liked that. Okay. That's pretty much everything I liked. I liked basically almost everything. There's only a couple things that I'm going to say I dislike or that are questionable. One is, I will say, the pacing on this is much slower than a modern book. The author does a lot of description words in describing the sunset and the stars, or Pa playing his fiddle and writing out the songs that he would sing, things like that a modern book probably wouldn't do. This is not a bad thing, but it can make it slower and harder for a modern child who is used to, instant microwave everything, that, super fast pace, has to slow down to read it. Now, again, I wouldn't say this is a bad thing, but it is there to be aware of. The final thing I'm going to say is about racism. So this isn't something that I consider too harsh in this book, but it is a controversy. So this is a real family in country that has not been super friendly with the natives, and as such there's tension there. And there are several instances where they interact and it's not always a positive interaction. Okay, so like the first time that Laura and Mary see I'll call it an Indian because that's what she calls them, even though I don't think that's a politically correct term in today's language. That's relatively recent. When this was written, that was totally an acceptable term. So she sees what she calls two naked men who come into their homestead and walk into the house where her mother and baby sister are. So Laura, she's 7, maybe 6. She's pretty young. And she's sitting there by the barn and sees two men go in to where her mom and baby sister are, with her dad is out hunting, and she is terrified. What are these strange men gonna do? Why are they here? Why did they just barge into our house? This is not a positive experience. It turns out that they want something to eat. They don't speak the same language that Laura's family does, so there's this interaction there where they basically demand, using sign language, basically signs, charades, that Caroline, Mrs. Wilder, Mrs. Ingalls, Laura's mother, make them some corn cakes. And so she does. But Caroline is terrified because what happens? I mean, can she refuse? What would happen if she gives them the corn cakes? Are they going to steal everything that they own? Something worse? They don't know. And so that is a terrifying incident. And as a real life thing, that would be terrifying. Like if somebody came into my house when my husband wasn't home and I had young kids and then demanded something of me, just barged in and started basically doing, cook me pancakes or something. I mean, that would be pretty scary. You'd be like, are they going to kill me? Are they going to take my kids? Are they going to take all my stuff? What is going on here? So it's understandable that they don't have a positive experience or a positive view of what's going on in this kind of situation. But I don't consider that racist to say that it was negative. From the Native Americans' point of view, perhaps this was culturally perfectly normal that you can go into your neighbor's house and just demand food because they were warriors out doing hunting or something like that, and that's just what they did. But for the white English speaking peoples, this was not something that they were comfortable with. But that's not the only thing that happens. There are several other run-ins. And later on, we've got their neighbor, Mr. Scott, and what he says. And I am going to read on page 284. Mr. Edwards said there were too many Indians in those camps and he didn't like it. Mr. Scott said he didn't know why so many of these savages were coming together if they didn't mean devilment. The only good Indian is a dead Indian, said Mr. Scott. Pa said he didn't know about that. He figured that Indians would be as peaceful as anyone else if they were left alone. And I'll stop there. And later on, Pa keeps kind of doing a more peaceful view of the situation. So here you had Mr. Scott. I mean, obviously that sounds pretty racist to say the only good Indian is a dead Indian. That's pretty bad. But Pa kind of refutes that. He's like, no, we don't need to be that bad. They could be perfectly fine. We just, live and let live is kind of his attitude. So overall, you can kind of see that there's some racist sayings, but overall, it's not a racist book. There's culture clashes, there's problems with misunderstandings and not understanding other people and being afraid of that kind of thing, but it's not outright racist as in hatred or of a specific race. It's just more discomfort and the tensions, but it's a real thing. It's very realistic in there. It's not a blind paint with a big brush. It's more individual. This is what I experienced and this is how I felt about it. Okay, so I wanted to give you a heads up on the potential racism. I will say, this is a fantastic series, but if you are a little hesitant about reading this particular book because you're sensitive about the racist issues, then pick a different book in the series. Like the first book, Little House in the Big Woods, doesn't have any mention of Native Americans, I don't think. The Long Winter. That one would be an excellent story that, again, I don't think there are any Native people in any of those. So most of the books don't have any interaction with Native peoples. It's really just mostly this one, I think, from what I vaguely remember from reading the series decades ago. I highly recommend it, though. 2 thumbs way up. I do think that this is fantastic, and if you haven't read them, even if you're an adult, go out and try them, because they're really well done. Okay, so my next book, part 2, we're going to do Of Monsters and Mainframes by Barbara Truelove. So this one, I'm not sure whether to say it is a fantasy or a science fiction. I'm leaning towards science fiction. It is about an AI who lives in a space shuttle, a spaceship, and she is fighting Dracula, and apparently is also involved in a bunch of other classic monsters like werewolves and other vampires and stuff, which, an undead or something too, I'm not sure. But it sounds quirky, it sounds silly. I mean, a spaceship trying to defeat Dracula sounds really far out there as far as weird, right? So I think that should be fun. So let's try that next time. And thank you for watching. I hope you will join me for the next episode.